Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have you with us. Let us know in the chat who you are and where you're joining us from, and what is your biggest fund management challenge or question that you have, because fund management starts with fun. So let us know, and then we'll do introductions here in just a minute. Just let us know where you're joining us from and what's your biggest fund management kind of challenge or opportunity or all of those things. Very excited to have all of you with us today.
Very much looking forward to the conversation with you, Lynn.
It's going to be a good one, Chelsea. Buckle up, folks. Go pickles. Okay, issue transparency. I love it. I have one of your pickles stickers for my
I
computer.
also have one of
Mhm.
those.
Underutilization, tracking down the details of usage. Maureen and Catherine are in the same boat. Brittany's trying to clean up the history of the world. Sarah is trying to get leadership to agree that this is a problem or a challenge or an opportunity. Unspent funds, haters talking about that money that just sits out there. I mean, I feel like I could spend it if you really want to. Oh, Elizabeth, yay, welcome at WashU. She's brand new to fund administration. So we're all just telling who we are, where we're joining from, and what is our biggest challenge or opportunity with fund administration, fund management. Brandy is talking about unspent funds there in Chapel Hill. Sarah in Iowa is joining that bell ringing there. Kim says trust. Emma may or may not. Oh, look at all these unspent
So
fund
many
friends.
unspent funds. Yes, we know things
Rachel's
for sure
joining
about that.
from the zoo. Rachel, if fund management were an animal at the zoo, what animal would it be? There's the tough question, right? Michael wants to spend some money. Susan can't handle the development officers wanting to do their own doc. Oh, bless it. That is not fun. Penn State College of Education, getting faculty to create and share spending plans. I love that. Duquesne at Lisa is saying unspent funds. Katie, aloha. I was just in Honolulu last week. Had a great time there with you all. Transparency. Becky at Idaho. Hi, Becky. Oh, yeah. How do we do a fund audit and where do we start? Girl, one step at a time, right? Missoula, Montana, your neighbor said their colleagues are doing some of the heavy lifting. At Stanford, it's building and repairing relationships with non-advancement partners. That is a tough one. Hey, Joanna Kupu. I had some of my Hawaii snacks for breakfast. You've got me addicted to like rice puffs. Hey, Leslie from Rochester. Let us know where you're joining us from and what your biggest challenge or question about fund management, which starts with fund, might I add it. For Chelsea and I, it is anyway, is so Fitchburg State. Oh, Katie is centralizing all of her fund reporting and awarding. So she's got a lot going on. Unspent non-endowed funds. Woo, that's a mouthful. Well, we're so excited that all of you are joining myself and Chelsea. We have just recently announced our partnership where Fundminer and DRG are working together. And I'm excited to have Chelsea Lemigo with me because she's one of us, y'all. She worked at UTEP or University of Texas at El Paso. And she had to deal with stewardship and fund management and said, there's got to be a better solution. So genius human that she is, or like-minded, strong leader that she is, she created Fundminer, and together with her partners, they are venturing to help solve the fund management process. And I think it's really important for all of us that we have a peer and a colleague who can, say words like invading the corpus and knowing what that means, or underwater funds and knowing our pains of transparency and unspent funds and trust. So we're going to be having a lot of programming together, she and her team. We also are partnering in consulting services and technology implementation using their platform. So this is us in our little stormtrooper outfits. Although I don't wear a lot of white, Chelsea, but we could have had an all white party for ourselves. So,
It's a
Chelsea, what are you
costume.
most excited about today?
I'm just so excited to share some knowledge and have a conversation with you, Lynn. As Lynn mentioned, I like to say that I feel like I lived through the blood, sweat, and tears of doing this work myself, the very manual and painstaking way of peeling back all the layers of the onion and trying to figure out what's going on and asking, but why after why after why after why. And it was really hard. So I am honored to now have Fundminer and get to work with partners like Lynn and DRG to deliver fund management and donor reporting content and information and really build community around the reality that it is and the challenges. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to partner with DRG on this too. When I was in the industry and doing this work, I was always trying to Google things. It was before the Chat GPT days, so that didn't exist then. And I don't know what the verb of GPTing, I suppose might be is. But I was always trying to just find information and resources and people to talk to, and it was really hard. So just happy that we have this format and venue to share information and knowledge with each other.
I love that. And Chelsea isn't just partnering, but she's also helping create. So, as many of you know, we released the Pulse of Donor Relations survey, but Chelsea has been partnering, making sure that she's sharing content. So, she also and her team did an unspent fund survey and fund management survey. And so, we have some of the data from that here. They've partnered with Case. So, you guys know my requirements for partners, right? They have to be good people, they have to have tech or partnership that works, and they have to contribute to our industry. And Chelsea checks all three of those boxes plus plus plus, and she's just a really smart chick, which I'm just saying takes one to know one, Chelsea. So we're going
Thank
to talk
you.
today a little bit about donor trust and how we can manifest that in our everyday lives through great fund management. So Chelsea, why don't you take us through a little bit of that as we walk into this with our colleagues here? Also, questions, our teams are both in the chat and we'll answer your questions live, so feel free to use the chat, the Q&A. You're going to get the recording, the slides, the chat, everything afterward, and an opportunity to connect with Chelsea's team. So just like a normal DRG day, we're here for you.
Thanks so much, Lynn. And one thing I wanted to start the conversation off today with was this notion that trust isn't just a buzzword that we should throw around, but really something that we should have a thoughtful plan around executing on, right? I feel like during my time working in the field, we often talked about trust and recognized it as something important, but there weren't a lot of people who were asking the questions around, well, how do we make sure that we are appearing trustworthy? And how are we actually delivering on our promises and doing what we say we're going to do? So, how are you actually delivering on that notion of trust? And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this too, but it feels like this conversation matters more than ever today, and donor expectations are rising and rising and rising, and we are struggling to meet those. We have also such constrained budgets, and a lot of our organizations were not shed in the news in a very positive light in recent times as well. So we've got a lot of scrutiny around our organizations. Donors are paying attention and asking questions. And one thing that we see is that specifically as I mentioned, the management and delivery piece of how we're doing after we raise money is often very sort of invisible or not talked about until it fails, right? So curious to hear from you too, Lynn, your thoughts around why trust and managing funds is more important today than ever before.
It's because it's always been important. I think now in times of budget constraint, in times of uncertainty, people look to organizations to provide that certainty, to provide that, and they have high expectations of us, as they should. We are pillars in the community as nonprofit organizations, and when trust in other sectors fails, they kind of look to us as the hope for their community, and we can't let them down. I think the other thing that's happening is donors are becoming more and more savvy. We have over 2 million nonprofits in the United States alone, another million in Canada, and globally there's another couple million. And so donors have choice. They don't just have to give to their alma mater. We see transformational donors like a Mackenzie Scott giving large unrestricted gifts, but only after they've thoroughly vetted the organization and made sure that they're in compliance. And so donors have choice, and we want to be their choice, not just out of pity or blind loyalty or faith. We want to be their choice because the number two reason why a donor continues to give to a nonprofit is because it's a well-managed nonprofit. It's also very difficult to ask a donor. I know tons of you are in campaign right now, or in the silent phase, which is the worst kept secret ever, or thinking about a campaign, and it's very difficult to ask a donor for more money if you haven't spent the money they've already invested. I don't know anybody that wants to have that conversation sitting across from a donor, and say, well, we have need for another 250K, right? And so but what did you do with my last 100K? Well, we're saving that for a rainy day. And I'm here to tell you all, in case you haven't noticed, in 2025, regardless of your situation, it is pouring. It is raining, it is pouring, no one is snoring. So that's why this is so important, Chelsea. What does the trust look like? How do our organizations, what does this look like in practice?
Yeah, and Lynn, I love that you brought up the fact that donors have choice, and we know that choice is becoming a bigger and bigger aspect of giving as well, right? And donors are choosing to give to organizations, like you mentioned, that are well managed and that are also demonstrating impact. And I think the other way that you can be the choice is through relationship, right? And through loyalty and through building that trust over time. And so we think about this donor trust loop, where when you secure a gift from a donor and they become a new donor, you have to make sure that you are honoring intent. And hopefully that is something that is outlined or clear or stated. And that's the job and responsibility of the organization to make sure is clear, right? If it's not clear, you need to make sure that it's clear that you and the donor have alignment and agreement on how those funds are going to be used. And the question is both external and internal when it comes to alignment. Do you have alignment with the donor on how the funds are going to be used? And do you have alignment internally on how the funds are going to be used? And are you able to ensure that the funds are actually used? And is that money that the donors trusted you enough with to give to you to make impact with actually making an impact? And being, is that program being delivered, or is that scholarship being awarded? Is that building being built? And oftentimes we really are feeling the effects of this and the breakdown at the stewardship component, right? It's when you're producing those annual reports and you find out that a fund wasn't used, so you're pulling that report suddenly and not sending it out and choosing to have silence instead of transparency, or when a donor is going to meet or a major gift officer is going to meet with a donor and they realize, oh, I should find out how we use that last gift. And then it's an hour away from their lunch and they're realizing they've just called their donor relations or their fund management or their operations colleagues who said, oh, it looks like we didn't use that fund, right? So that's really where we start to see that breakdown and feel the breakdown. But where we actually see the problem lie and where the solutions need to originate is oftentimes at the operational aspect, and making sure that we have the right internal operations and alignment to deliver on what the donor thinks they're going to be experiencing. And all of this, of course, is to hopefully influence future giving. And I want to remind the group here that, of course, the reason we're trying to influence future giving, I would almost put an arrow right back to utilization and impact again, right? We're raising the money to make an impact, But in order to get there, you can't kind of just jump across, even though that's sort of what it seems like it might be or what the journey is like. We've got to make sure we're going through that loop and that we're taking the time to ensure we're honoring intent and that we're delivering on our promises and actually using the funds. And we find that donors actually place very significant importance on fund utilization. It's the number one factor in a donor's experience when they're giving to an organization. They want to make sure that their gifts were dispersed as they had directed. That's the number one factor in their giving experience. And 80% of donors want to see proof of impact before they continue their support and choose, I will say again, to give again. And of course, you can't share impact, going back to our trust loop here, unless you've used the funds in the first place. So you want to make sure that you have the right internal controls and processes and procedures and partnerships in place to actually deliver on that impact. We also see that donors will outright stop giving if they feel like there's a lack of transparency on how the funds were used. So if they're starting to feel that there's a lack of transparency, you've already gone too far in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Gone are the days of, well, I'll just give my money and hope it works out. The number one reason why donors stop giving is because they're asked too often. The number two reason is they don't know that their gift made a difference. And I think as we think about future generations of donors, how are we going to tell these stories that your gift made a difference if we internally don't even have the faith that it had an impact? So we can really see that loop. And I like the word of loop, because it really does describe this, or as some of us who have less couth would call it, a vicious circle. A vicious circle, because again, people are looking to have an impact. And here's the great news though, Chelsea. So as we look at, some of these next stats that you have on the next slide about what we've found in our studies, the good news is that we are part of the solution. So if you go over to the dollars that we found, do you have that slide? There we go. Here's what Chelsea and DRG and Fundminer are seeing. 20 to 40% of donor funds go unspent each year, each cycle, whatever you want to call it. And there's going to be a rare case when you have $0 unspent. Like, that's just reality. However, the average organization in our DRG study, and I'm sure Ashley and the team will link our DRG study, and we've already listed the Fundminer study, but 52% of their annual fundraising goal is sitting there unspent. I have one client that has double the amount of their annual fundraising goal unspent. And she said, we're just not going to fundraise for 2 years until the other side of the house can spend all the money they have. Right. And I'm like, whoo, that's bold. But I mean, think about that. Think about what that means as well. And the average endowment spendable total is, when we look at the finances, is about 3 years worth of distribution just sitting there, not making impact. Meanwhile, for those of us that work in universities, we have students that can't afford an education. Government programs are being slashed here and there. We continue to fundraise for more and more money. Or on the program side, like, people can't afford to go to conferences to present their papers, or we can't afford to hire extra faculty or build those robust programs. Well, here we have money sitting there. And as Chelsea and I talk about all the time, what we don't want is, you see that newspaper? We don't want that to come to life. And there have been examples of organizations that have had that come to life. My mom and dad have simple rules for me in life. Well, okay, they have really high expectations, but one of them is never end up on the 11 o'clock news, because nothing good ever happens on the 11 o'clock news. And if the right reporter asks the right question at your organization, you're going to be in a wrong way when it comes to unspent funds. And I know a lot of us are personally uncomfortable with our big little secret there. And so, yeah, these are our realities, and nobody wants to be in the headlines. We already have enough headlines and news alerts. We don't need that kind of trouble in our lives. So what does this mean for organizations as we move past the bad and we move into, but we are part of the solution? So, Chelsea, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. And I think part of this is us having this conversation, right? Oftentimes, this is the elephant in the room. Some people are afraid to ask the questions or afraid to even look at the data around this. So I think that there's a level of acknowledgement that we owe to the industry to say, we're not just going to raise the money, but we're going to make sure we're using it and using it responsibly and ethically and in a timely manner, and that we have the right infrastructure to share this information and these outcomes back with our donors. And I think part of the acknowledgement of what's happening is acknowledging what's causing what's happening, right? And I think it's part of part of it is that we need to acknowledge how complex this is naturally at our organizations and that it's not necessarily something that anybody did wrong. No one's failing in their jobs. We're going to talk in a little bit about how early as an industry this topic is, but it's just something that naturally exists. If you think about a higher education example, you have a central fundraising or advancement team who's responsible for raising all of the money. They're signing agreements. They're the ones who are sending reports and responsible for compliance. But they rely on hundreds of other people oftentimes who actually spend the money, and nobody has access to the same or right information. And information is scattered across many different systems. There's CRM systems, there's donor data, there's endowment data, there's financial balances, there's student data. There's all of these different components involved. And to add more complexity to that, oftentimes we're managing thousands. Some organizations are managing tens of thousands of unique funds. Managing even 100 unique funds is very difficult, and some of those funds are endowed and some are non-endowed. They all receive funding in different ways. And I'm sure some folks have gone through CRM conversions recently or accounting system conversions recently. So it's a very complex dynamic of fundraising that the industry hasn't paid very much attention to in the past. And that's really why, again, Lynn and I have chosen to talk about this and bring community around the topic of managing funds and responsible use of funds and program delivery, and really focusing on the outcomes that come with fundraising. And so we acknowledge that this is very difficult to do. We know that budgets are strapped, resources are constrained, and a lot of this is driven by manual processes and reporting. One of our favorite quotes that we heard during our roundtable study with Case was that this is all powered by Microsoft Excel and caffeine at your average organization, right? Lots of caffeine and spreadsheets and VLOOKUPs. And this is really what inspired the work that we do at Fundminer, is this notion of why can't we have tools and software and community and an ecosystem built around managing funds and using funds and sharing impact, which is what we're raising the money for in the first place. And so with tools like Fundminer, teams can leverage technology to empower all of the different stakeholders around the organization with tools and resources and information. And it also goes back to all of the processes that have to happen on a regular and annual basis to make this work. When we think about going back to the trust loop here very quickly, in order to make this all function, there's again so many different departments and systems and people and processes involved. We need the confidence that it's all going to be working. And so, Len, we talked a lot about the risks involved with not doing this work right and not paying attention and not investing in fund management, and what that impact is on the donor relationships and what could happen if this got out in the media. But also, this is impact that could be made at the end
It's
of it.
impact. It's the very thing that we are all committed to and why we work in nonprofit, right? And I asked in the question while you were chatting, Chelsea, how many fund managers or budget managers do you have at your organization? And everybody's like hundreds, thousands. And so it's, again, we're not talking about, but that further breaks the trust because there's not one single source of spending. There's not one way to do it. And we know that turnover, because a lot of those are admin positions. And so I really want to think about this in terms of the complexity. And our friend Caitlin said, okay, Chelsea, here's one for early 2026 for us as a partnership. Let's do one of these where our donor relations folks can bring their finance
Oh
partners. So
yeah.
we're going to do that, Caitlin. We're going to have you bring those folks and really talk through that. So let's go forward. So we've identified the issue. We've identified the scattered way in which we manage and think about our funds. Let's talk about what is next, or how we look at this
Yes.
continuum that we're on. And I want to say first, if you're feeling a little defeated, if you're feeling like this is a big elephant to swallow, it's okay. I've been working with one client on fund remediation and unspent funds for 6 years, you guys. So it is not, because it's such a big unwieldy ball of wackadoodle. It takes time to get your arms around it. So Chelsea, show us this that your team has worked up and how this relates to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to bring up this example of how we tackled fund management at my former institution, which is what really inspired Fundminer to be built and launched, and how we were able to begin sustaining a high level of utilization and really operate from a proactive and confident space. But I want to also, going back to the, I think, kind of keyword from all of today is acknowledgement. I again want to acknowledge that this work is hard, but it also is solvable. I think sometimes people are so afraid of how hard it seems that they'll kind of put it to the side and going back to, well, we know that this is a problem, but maybe we'll solve it in the future. And you have to start today. It is something that's going to take time, but it is solvable. And I think having resources like DRG and like Fundminer and like everybody who is here on the webinar who can collaborate and share information and share practices and say, this is how we were able to get from 77% of utilization to 95% of utilization. This is how we're able to sustain it going forward. It is possible. You're not alone. And we find that most organizations are actually in the early stages of fund management. They're just starting to stand up programs around this.
And that's so interesting because even though they have hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars in their endowment, they're still in the crawling stages of this. If you all out there have the opportunity, one of our favorite places to start crawling, walking, running is we come in and we talk to your deans and your academic leadership. And we just did this with our friends at Michigan State. And I said to them, if you as a dean want to move forward fundraising as you work through this big campaign, the number one way is to get a hold of your funds. We've done the fund audit at Michigan State. Now here's how to handle it. And the deans were really inspired by the data and that they could play a role in this. So if you have an opportunity, put your team or put yourself or have someone go in front of your leadership, because it is, and I want to acknowledge it does seem unwieldy and non-tackleable, which is a technical term, by the way, but it can be done, and one foot in front of the other, like all the other challenges we face in our lives and our work. So, but acknowledge that there are very few people that are over there in stage 5 who have it all figured out, and they may or may not have been resourced at a level that you haven't had the opportunity to be resourced at yet. But when we show leadership, especially senior leadership, deans, provosts, presidents, and things like that, and we show them how much money they could have that's sitting there, they take action pretty quickly, because a lot of them may not have put the 2 and 2 together, or had someone like Heather and their central finance team there at Western talk about how they can utilize and can have spending plans. So
One
this
of my favorite stories, Lynn, from a client that we worked with was we did a training on Fundminer and we also hosted a spending workshop. And they invited all of their deans and their support staff in, and we kind of sat in a room and all took turns jumping around and helping people and answering questions. And they were seeing their information in our platform. But it started to feel like a game show all of a sudden. We'd have one dean who was like, I found $1 million. And then someone else said, I found a professorship. And then someone said, well, I found a chair over here. And it was actually pretty fun and inspiring. And they all walked away really excited. Like they just hit the jackpot, finding a bunch of money that they didn't know they had.
because all of them are struggling with their budgets too, you guys. Like they're human beings, but they aren't down in the nitty gritty like that. And deans do get competitive. Not that I've ever seen that before either, Chelsea, but finding $1 million means that they can deliver on their mission of impact. So I'm
Yeah.
there for you.
Well, and I would say too that we need them to spend the money, right? And so we can demonstrate the impact of what we raised, but we also have to take the ownership of making sure we're giving them the information and making sure that the process is working so that they can spend the money. So we have to take the ownership of facilitating that
Yep.
as well. So we've talked a little bit about how most organizations are in the early stages, and many of you may be curious where you are when it comes to program maturity. So I would invite you all to scan the QR code, and it's just a 5 question online assessment. We'll give you just a few minutes here, and would love for you in the chat to drop your score if you are comfortable sharing it. And I'll share with you what the industry benchmark is that we see. And not surprised, but out of 25 points, the average score is only a 14.5, which really aligns with, again, what we're seeing here, right? Most organizations are just in that stage 1 and 2 and getting those programs off the ground.
That's an opportunity. And I don't want a job where I'm just maintaining the status quo. I'm a builder. I like a challenge. We can also drop the link in the chat for you all if you can't scan the QR code. Maybe you're in a big conference room. And also, if you want to message Chelsea and myself, you can message host and panelists, and that only goes to us if you want to share your score, but maybe not with the whole room. Although I will say, when you share your score publicly, you enable other people to feel good. That's what conferences and get-togethers, it's kind of like when I talk about my mental health struggles, right? I feel like that opens a door for other people to empathize and to also share their challenges or struggles and make it a safe space. So we want to encourage you to be open and honest, but also know that we know that everybody's organization is different. And so if you don't have that comfortability, you can keep it to yourself. You can share it with us, but it'll give you a good kind of gauge on, oh, if I'm below the average, above the average, or if got zero in a certain part, then maybe that's where we start. And that makes eating the elephant less paralyzing there. But I do want to make it a safe space. We always at DRG want to encourage you to help your community, but also understand that we all have different like people and different leadership who may be like, I don't want you sharing Fundminer University's information, but not asking you for confidential donor information, asking you for where you are.
Yeah.
And together, when we share, we're better as a community.
Yeah, I totally agree, Lynn. And I like that you mentioned that you may be at different stages for different dimensions. We see most of the time you're almost definitely in different stages across different dimensions. And to your point, figuring out where you are on a roadmap like this can help you identify things you can work on and what might be the highest priority for you to tackle first as well. So it's going to give you ideas of ways you can improve, and you can even find others who might be at similar stages um, and vent together and brainstorm together and think of ways to get your score higher and move up to a more optimized stage or level.
I like it because it helps you. Does the math for you, Chelsea.
That is also nice. It's
I mean, just
automated,
saying.
calculates.
God love some technology for doing. So I'm not like, look at all these sharers. Thank you, everyone who's sharing out your score, being candid, vulnerable, even some of you. And we haven't had anybody over a 15 yet, either privately or publicly, just so you know. I'm not going to divulge. So everybody is kind of in the same, we're all in a similar, not the same, we're all in similar ships on the sea, and this will help us. So I love that. Really love that you guys are sharing.
Yeah. And I love that so many people are in the same phases too.
Yes.
We'll have to get a group together to talk about it,
Well,
right?
maybe we can add it to one of our learning communities, Chelsea. We're in 2025, 2026. One of the things that we're doing is starting to build learning communities in base camp and communities of practice. So maybe together you and I can work on a community of practice together. So that might be a great opportunity for folks who, yesterday we stumbled upon a group of folks that want to work on unrestricted reporting. Now looks like I've got a group of folks that want to work on their fund management together. So still nothing above a 15. So see, folks, like you're in good company
Yeah.
together with other organizations. So love that.
And Len, speaking of upcoming workshops and things and webinars, and we have a calendar here of ways that Fundminer and DRG are going to be collaborating over the
Yeah.
next several months. So here's a couple things that folks can keep an eye out for. Fundminer will be launching our global benchmarking survey on the topic of fund management and stewardship. Lynn, I know you all just also published your donor pulse
Yep.
survey, which I would encourage everybody to run, not walk, to get the results of. So if you can share a little bit of maybe some highlights from that as well.
Sure. So it actually has sections on fund management and fund reporting. And we found out that, there are very few organizations that actually report on all funds to donors, and yet donors are expecting that. So we have some opportunities, otherwise known as work to do. The other thing that we have found is very much like your research, folks are in the discovery phase and in phase 1 or 2 of their fund management program. So to Laura's question about how can we be included in those learning communities or communities of practice, when we send out the email with the recording and the slides and everything, we will send out a form that you can fill out. And if you want to join that community of practice, we'll get emails out to you probably after the Thanksgiving holiday, because a lot of our team is going to spend some quality family time, including myself. And we'll get that community of practice up and running for you all. But the other thing is that, Chelsea, maybe one of the things we can do in the spring together is something around the bringing the finance offices together in with us. And
My favorite
and
topics.
I know, right? And offering that opportunity for folks to bring their finance partners in this, because it really is a collaborative effort in what we do together. But yeah, I think that the other thing that the Pulse tells us is that our staffing isn't going to go through the roof, but stewardship, which is one of the 4 pillars of donor relations, still is primarily important, yet we're still wasting a lot of the time on donor honor rolls and lists and walls and giving societies that keep us from doing spending money, fund management, and reporting. So I'm
Mhm.
gonna I took that
Yeah.
yesterday as a big takeaway as to how to kill off more things like we've already killed the honor rolls, but next up might be giving societies plaques and walls and things that keep us away from spending the money.
Well, and Lynn, I love that you brought that notion up of how are we spending our time. I was talking to a colleague very recently last week, and he was showing me a report he's putting together on fund balances, which huge step forward. I think there are three on in stage three on the scale, so I would consider them definitely above average as far as how they're approaching fund management. And I asked him how long he spent producing that report, and he said, I would say a week of time. And I just asked, wouldn't you have rather spent that time actually communicating with your fund managers and faculty and building relationships with them and talking about the funds, not putting together a spreadsheet or talking to your donors even, or working with your development officers to give them great information to share with donors. There's just so many other things. And I know all of us have such long lists of to-dos. But I thought that was just fascinating that many of us are sort of stuck in that cycle of spending our time on these tasks and completing these tasks that really there's tools now to help with.
Absolutely.
Um, Lynn, we've got some questions. We'd love to hear from the group. Two things I want to
Yeah.
mention really quick before we turn it over for Q&A. I mentioned that we've got our upcoming survey. Fundminer will also be at the Four Pillars Chicago event in April, so that's one of my favorites and very much looking forward to that. We have our Future of Fund Management conference coming up this May as well. Not a coincidence that we planned it over Cinco de Mayo for some extra fun. But we are offering a 15% discount for all of our partners at DRG. So please grab this code, write it down. It's FM by DRG for an extra 15% off our conference. With that, would love to just go ahead and turn it over to Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, I would love to hear for those of you that contribute in the beginning with some of your frustrations or what Chelsea and I can do, because we have a lot of knowledge and we have a lot of examples to help you think through how we can restore our donor trust, or who are the people in your neighborhood that we need to talk to about your unspent funds or your cleaning up historic funds. You know, a lot of rulings have been made this year, and if you're in the United States, you're taking a look at all your funds and the restrictions that are no longer allowable. If you haven't yet received a letter from someone, you may get one soon. So how can Chelsea and I talk to you through some of those challenges about getting information, sharing that information, things like that? And yes, Elizabeth, the slides will be available after the webinar, and so will the recording. So Judy says, our business office has a lot of funds in their endowment management system that our office has no information on. When you talk about fund management, are you referring to the funds we have information on, or all endowment funds? That's a great question. We are talking about all funds. So we actually, through DRG and Fundminer, offer something called fund remediation. That sounds like a very serious thing, but if you don't have documentation for a fund, we can actually help you build that documentation through memos to file using historical data and trends that you have. But all funds need to be managed. Whether or not they have a living donor or not is not relevant to whether or not we manage the fund. If it's endowed, or even if it's spend down or restricted, whatever your term for, I think it's funny too, because we have like 5 different terms for non-endowed restricted funds. All of those funds have to be managed, and there's actually a law that covers them. Whether or not they have living donors or not is a secondary consideration to managing those funds. So it's common, especially in organizations that have been around a while. But we can do memos to files and fund remediation on those. What else, Chelsea?
I would double down, Lynn, on what you said. It's very common for organizations to start with monitoring endowed funds. And if there's higher ed folks on the call, they will probably even start with just scholarships that are endowed and then move on to all endowed funds. So we kind of see this natural progression in how an organization will start managing funds. But I would wholeheartedly agree with Lynn that I don't think the type of fund or whether it's endowed or not, or whether there's a living donor or not, should dictate the level of stewardship and responsibility around the fund and responsibility around spending the money as well. So we always encourage folks to think about what are all of your philanthropic funds and all of your funds that are coming from donor sources.
And UPMIFA is the law that governs it in the United States. In every state except Pennsylvania, they have their own version. So I know there's somebody from Penn State on here, but it actually has a requirement in it of prudent management of those funds and financial reporting on funds. So you have to make sure that you're in compliance with that. So you want to make sure that, you know, all of your and your internal counsel and folks should be pretty well trained, and so should your officers who govern the spending, the NACUBO folks. So Julie, you're right. We now refer to UPMIFA in our gift agreements. It is and it gives us leeway too for our olds and smalls and things like that. So you can actually be released from restrictions on small institutional funds. And that's less than $25,000 US in the US. This is only for the US, and those that are older than 20 years. By the way, 20 years ago was the year 2005. For those of you who may be Gen X like me and think 20 years ago was 1996. Tis not. Tis not, tragically. So, okay. So Chelsea, we have a question. We're going to keep it anonymous, but how do we encourage spending when our cash management policy is based on the money not being spent?
Yeah, well, I would probably question the policy a little bit.
Yes.
And I feel that policies are in place to control process, right? And ultimately to protect organizations and everyone involved from risk. And I feel that when you think about managing donor money, it goes back to donor intent, right? Did the donor give the gift for you to just sit on, or did they give the gift for it to make impact, right? And be used. So I think it actually goes back to donor intent and what was the agreement with the donor when they gave that. What are your thoughts on that, Lynn?
Yeah, you know, so I've had the good fortune to work on many nonprofits, university, schools, and the law is very clear that the original intent of the gift is important. And we have one attorney that we work with that's fantastic. Even, for example, we had an institution that would take non-endowed gifts and put them in the endowment, and that actually violated the donor's intent because they wanted it to be spent down, so they had to remove all that. So donor intent really does rule the day, and most courts are not going to stand up when it comes to not honoring that. So it's a great question that you asked, because I'm sure there are other people who are facing that. So, you know, we really want to think about what that means when we work at an organization where our spending policy is not to spend.
Yeah.
So that would not be compatible with the mission of our organization either.
And Lynn, we sometimes get the question, what if our, foundation is living off the float, right? And I think that this goes back to is again everything all roads lead to donor intent at the end of the day. If they were trying to fund your operation, that would have been the purpose of the fund and the gift, right? So I think it all still goes back to the donor intent, and what the gift was given for.
I completely agree. And I also want to acknowledge that's a difficult situation for a lot of folks. And there are organizations that are, I was talking with the folks at AGB, the Association of Governing Boards, and we do know that there are finance people who don't have a vested interest in spending the money because they do see the benefit in some of the float or some of the gains from unspent funds. But again, the risk is so large. And so, for those of you that are having trouble with maybe your partners or maybe doing some convincing or leading up, as we like to call it, I talk about risk management, especially for those of you in education in the United States. We have enough going on. Some of you have experienced that firsthand with our institutions or organizations being under scrutiny. And so we don't need additional scrutiny when it comes to funds and fund management. And there's no guarantee that if we're not using the money, we aren't going to, in some weird way, lose it. I mean, I've seen, we've just seen some strange things. So I like to talk with senior leadership about risk. They don't like that word. They really don't like that word. And it's not just the negative publicity, it's the risk of the mismanagement of those funds. It's the risk of using that float. So they can be serious things, folks. And so, but again, here's the thing. I always tell everyone when they're in these situations, no matter your position in the hierarchy of your organization, you have the right, you have the wherewithal, and you can affect change. I was an acknowledgement coordinator, basically a glamorized administrative assistant when I started in donor relations. And there are ways to be persuasive to help people care about these things. So we have another question, Chelsea. I'm loving these questions. Can you give a simple, straightforward example of how an organization can set up a clear cadence of communication from gift processed to the PI notified or the fund manager? Some of us don't have PIs, some of us do, to funds spent to impact reported. And she said, not necessarily dependent on software. We do know that none of our systems talk, right? So your finance, where they hold the endowment funds, usually doesn't talk to your fundraising database, which usually doesn't talk to the student side. There are softwares that can help you do that. But let's take a step back, because for me and Chelsea, I have conversations with all of our partners. This is not about selling software. This is about improving our industry. So to answer your question, the simple, straightforward answer is, when you process a gift, it goes into a fund ledger number. I need to pull a list of all the money that came into that fund ledger number at least multiple times a year. I like to do it monthly, if not quarterly, if you can't do monthly. Then the PI or the budget manager is notified, whoop, Chelsea, here's a spreadsheet of the money you have to spend, and here's the criteria for spending it. That person has an imperative or an understanding that spending that fund is part of their job responsibility, which at some institutions we have them sign paperwork that says so. The funds are spent, and when they are spent, it is logged into a system. And I don't care if a system is an Excel spreadsheet some days. Good, better, best, like we always teach. There's no right or wrong. In a sophisticated system, it would tell you what it was spent on based on budgeting codes, right? In a not so great system, they would type in what they're spent on. And when the money is spent, it would alert us in donor relations land. Hey, Chelsea spent $10,000 on this fund. And I would be able to email, text, message, carrier pigeon, strategic owl, walk by their office and say, can you please answer 3 questions about the impact of this money? Would take the content from those 3 questions, combine it with a spending report, and deliver it to a donor.
And Lynn, I would you outlined those steps so well, and how I would also kind of summarize that is, and really breaking it down is, big fan of a process map, right?
Yes.
So, get everyone in the room, a representative from gift processing who is a PI, who is in accounting, who's doing your impact reports, and talk through the process and say, okay, when the gift is, after the gift is deposited, how does the PI get notified? What information is sent? How is that information sent? So ask all of the W's and H's, or however that saying goes, of whys, all of the levels of whys and how, and chart out the process. Sometimes you got to, really break it down.
Like I said, get a chart, or a PowerPoint or some sticky notes in a wall. And remember Schoolhouse Rocks. Maybe that's me aging myself, but how a bill becomes a law, which doesn't seem to happen much right now. But map it out with sticky notes on a wall if you have to, and figure out where are the places where a person could fall through or money's going to fall through that cracks. I will tell you one that often happens is when a fund reaches maturity. They either have their bat mitzvah, that's a good Jewish joke there for you, as I worked at yeshiva, but so a donor's been paying on the fund for 4 or 5 years, and when it reaches maturity and has a endowment spend down available, oftentimes the spending department isn't notified. There are not systems or flags in a lot of our systems, and again, they don't talk to each
Enough
other, so
people.
it's manual, right? So let's think about where are opportunities for the system to break down, right? So I love that I have fans of Schoolhouse Rock here. I feel like Chelsea, and I'm here. It's your team. If I could have the Fundminer team take that gift processing all the way through to impact reporting, and we could map it out for folks, Chelsea and I, and we could get one of our brilliant marketing minds like Hader or someone who's good with the graphics the way we are not. We can give you the content and we can create one, and then we can give that as a download eventually. So Chelsea, I'm
I
always
love
coming
that.
up with work for other people to help us with.
If you know Hader and Cadence on our team, this is already being drafted as we speak.
I
So
love, just like when I say, and I know my team will drop a link and my team drops a link, and it's like it makes my day. Like all I need and then is just a snack delivered with it. So, and yes, happy birthday, Hater. So yep, I knew it. He knew he
yeah,
was sketching it out. We'll make it look good. And also what we can do is we can put up, here's the ideal scenario, and then give you boxes to write in your own. We do that in a lot of our workbooks at our conferences. Our conferences are hands-on working conferences. So that's a great idea. Okay.
love
Okay.
that.
We just helped somebody outline their FY26 goal.
I love that. And Lynn, we need your help for one more thing because we've got a really good question that was posed. And so
Ooh.
I'm going to read it to you because I think you're going to have a great response on this one. This is from Leslie, and this is going back to earlier when we were talking about some of the breakdowns, but um, what would you do to rebuild trust with a donor after there's been a breach? So if they found out, for example, that a fund was reinvesting and not used for 10 years in a row, and they're very upset, how would you fix that relationship?
Yes. Yes. So, Leslie has been a good friend for a long time, and we like to call this service recovery at Disney. And we use the HEARD method. That's HEARD. It's an acronym, and it means here. So the first thing we have to do is let the donor let it all out. I've been yelled at by the finest. The second thing is empathize. I can understand why that's frustrating. That must be awful. Then we have to apologize, whether it's our fault or not. That's the A, right? Not sorry that happened to you. I am sorry. I take accountability for this. Our systems failed you. Then we have to resolve their particular problem. So we are going to ensure that your fund is spent every year. I have communicated with the team if you don't hear from us. And then we have to diagnose, that's the D, the systemic issue that allowed this to happen. And then we have to say to the donor, do you know what? Thank you. By you having this missed opportunity, by this mistake happening to your fund, by this failure in our systems, you actually brought to us and showed us something. So you actually gave us two gifts. One, your charitable gift. And second, you're actually helping us. And you're going to hear a grumble. Well, that's not why I did it. I did it because I'm mad and, and you should be better than this. And I gave to a big university and I trusted you. You're right. And we failed, and we're going to work to make that better. I can't guarantee you that it's going to be perfect in the future, but here's what I can guarantee. My team and I are going to work on this, and we're going to constantly seek your feedback until it is correct. And so this is my contact information, and here's what we're going to do. And then we have to be patient. Here's what we do know, that when donors have an issue that we resolve, we apologize for, and we fix, they're 4 times more likely to be loyal to us and give us larger dollar amounts. Can you tell also that I'm used to apologizing to people, for both myself and others? I will apologize until the cows come home. I'm really good at it. I fall on a sword. I usually make honest mistakes, but that is how you rebuild trust. You don't try to go above and beyond. You don't try to fall all over yourselves, but you have to be super reliable and super count onable. You have, and I take the relationship and I take the fall, not my fundraiser, because again, they tend to cycle in and out more than we do. So yes, I am the queen of under promising and over delivering, and I'm also the queen of saying, and we're human, and you've made us better. And that might sound like fluff, sir, but it's not. It's not. And they're like, what just happened? And I'm like, gotcha. I mean, thank you. Thank you so much. But it is true. That method, that herd method, works every time. So feel free to reach out to Chelsea and myself. We also are going to send out the community of practice invite, the recording and everything. And we have so much more in store for you all through this partnership. We're going to help them bring customers on board. Like if you want Fundminer software and you're not ready for it yet, we can do the consulting and the change management to get you there. We can talk to your deans and your leadership. That way you don't have to. We can be the ones to tell them the truth. That way it's not coming from someone that has anything to gain or sell or things like that. But we're partnering for the good and for the good in all of you, so that the money goes to impact the people that you raised it for. Thank you all for sharing your time. I can't wait for you guys to meet more of Chelsea and her team. And again, we're going to get you some resources. So we're here to help. You just let us know what you need. And we're really, really thrilled. So thanks, everyone. And thanks to Chelsea. I love my friends. So thanks, everybody. You have a great day.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.